Okay, so we're talking about small groups again, and we've been talking about kind of the what and the why of small groups. Really, it's the ministry of the word going further than just the pulpit on Sunday morning, but really going out into the congregation and having actual life discussions about what we're talking about. We're also being in community. We're doing life on life. We're walking together in holiness and having conversations. Sometimes those conversations, maybe even outside of that small group time, are difficult, but they're meaningful and they accomplish a lot. So, what I want to talk about today, real quick, is what does this time actually look like? We kind of know the reason why we're doing them and what it is, but what exactly happens in a small group time? Is it all just sitting around having conversation? Is it just fellowship? What actually happens in this time? And from the beginning, we've said that you don't have to be a teacher to lead these groups. In fact, that's kind of what we don't want to some extent, because one of the issues that we have in a traditional Sunday school class where it's a master teacher, you kind of just come in, sit down, and it's just the teaching and that's it. One of the issues with that is, and that's a great thing. We want to know more of the word and we want to grow. That's absolutely 100% true. But one of the things you miss out on is healthy discussion that really takes that teaching to a different level. To where in a master teacher class, it's 100% teaching and 0% conversation. Where we want these groups to be more of like 70-30, 70% discussion and 30%, teaching or leading. Maybe even 80-20 would be probably a better percentage. So we really don't call these leaders of these groups teachers, but more like facilitators is probably the best word to use. Really, we're looking for these leaders to open up their home on a weekly basis and somebody steer that conversation. Really, the question that I give that facilitator to kind of steer that conversation. But let's first begin by talking about what happens in that group. If you've ever been a part of these groups, and again, there's probably 100 different names for them: small groups, home groups, community groups, life groups. You can call them anything you want, but at the end of the day, there is a flow to this, which is why this is so important for the facilitator to know. That when you open up your home, it's not, hey, we got an hour, need you to come in, sit down, and let's get going. There is a flow to it. And so what hopefully happens in that time is, let's say your small group, just for lack of argument, let's say that your small group meets on Sunday night at 6 o'clock. Well, let's just say it meets from 6 to 7. Well, in that time when people, not everybody in a perfect world, shows up on time, but not everybody shows up on time. People kind of come in, when they get there. And so there is a natural flow that needs to happen in, I would say, the first 15, maybe even 20 minutes. So if you meet at 6 o'clock, from 6 to 6:15, maybe even 6:20, even when everybody's already there, you allow that kind of kitchen, grab some coffee, grab a drink, grab a brownie, whatever you have, cookie or whatever. Maybe you have finger foods that night. Maybe you don't have anything. Maybe you just have some chips and a drink, and that's it. But there is a natural time, kind of in the kitchen, maybe even in the living room, of just sidebar conversations, one-on-one, couples talking. How was your week? Wasn't that sermon this morning awesome? No, just kidding. There's just natural conversations that happen. Even when you see that everybody's there, let that fellowship continue to linger on. It's just like in a Sunday school class. You don't want to get into the session or the study too soon. There's that natural fellowship time you want to allow to happen. Once you get into that, so maybe 6:20, you kind of call everyone into the living room. Let's get going. and there might be an opening prayer time. But really, at this point, you may want to check in with the whole group. Hey, did everybody have a good week? Any before we get into the pastor's questions from his sermon, anything that we need to talk about, maybe even from last week or something going on in your life that you want to share or something like that. But you're just kind of opening things up, starting to have a conversation. But at some point, you want to transition over to, so these are the 3 to 4 questions that our pastor's given us to discuss. And those questions, I hope, will be done, the best that I can week to week. But as a facilitator that's steering this conversation, yes, I 100% of the time want you to be talking about these things. If there happens to be, the Holy Spirit's just moving and there's a conversation that you just feel very convicted about that y'all need to have, on rare occasion, that's okay. But most of the time, I want you to stay with the questions. Now, don't feel like you have to finish all the questions. Yeah, on a normal night, try to finish all the questions. But if there's healthy conversation happening over the first question, let it. Don't force the issue. Okay, we're running out of time. We got to get to the next question. It might be okay that if you run out of time, then it's hey, we didn't get to the last question, but I want you to, in the car on the way home, you and your spouse or you and the Lord or whoever, talk about this question. It doesn't have to be forced, but go over those questions. And as a facilitator, hopefully not, but maybe on rare occasion that question isn't framed the best. But it is important for that facilitator to one, had been there in the service and listened to the sermon. Even if you were out of town or whatever, you weren't able to make it that Sunday, you need to be listening live to that sermon, so you kind of know what's going on. Maybe your group meets on a Tuesday or a Thursday or a Wednesday night. Then you need to listen to that sermon, obviously, so you kind of know. So you're not just reading the question, but as a facilitator, the way that you should open up, question number 1. So the question might read, what is Paul's point about love have to do with our marriages or our families or something like that? Well, I would encourage you not to just read the question from beginning to end, but opening rather by saying, so John's been talking in 1 Corinthians 13 about the context of that chapter is not like high school love. It really has to do with the church loving each other because he's writing to the church. So if you were here on Sunday morning, you heard that, and I think that's what the Lord really spoke to us on Sunday morning. I know he spoke to me. And so here's the first question that we have tonight. So you're putting everything in context. Rather than just sit down and ask a question, you're kind of getting everybody set and ready. Hey, remember when the pastor was talking about this? This is the context. Or maybe you weren't even here. We certainly don't want people to think that, well, because I was not there on Sunday morning, I shouldn't even show up to small group because I don't know. No, that's not. We don't want you to do that. We want you to be at small group regardless. But you open it up in the context of what's going on. What was John talking about? What was the speaker talking about? And then phrase the question. And then so discussion kind of comes from that. And then, remember you're steering and so you let the conversation have some freedom and let it pick up. Obviously, there's sometimes when people aren't answering, you might have to chime in, or you kind of look to your friend for him to chime in and kind of get things going. But you're steering the evening. You're steering the conversations. And then once you get to the last question and you feel like you've had enough time, you can move on to prayer and kind of concluding the night. But what happens if, John, we sit down, we shoot through the questions in 15 minutes, And to be honest, especially because we're just starting this, it's really just, quick question, quick answer. There's not a lot of great, amazing conversation happening. And we go through the questions, and that's basically it. Well, as a facilitator, obviously that's not good enough, right? We want, and there may be nights like this, and that's okay. I'm not telling you to force anything, but at the same time, as a facilitator, one of your responsibilities is that feeling out your room, feeling out the people in front of you. That maybe these. I hope those questions were great, but maybe for your group, it wasn't deep enough, or it doesn't really address maybe an issue that you think your group needs to talk about. So knowing the questions beforehand and listening to the sermon, be prepared not to teach, a 20-minute sermon, but to maybe give a question that you have. Maybe when you think about, so John was talking about 1 Corinthians 13, talking about love, talking about the church, then you might say, so I know for us, my wife and I, one of the things that led us to this church was looking for a church that loves each other. Do you think we do that well at Jackson Way Baptist Church, or something like that? But you're able to read your group and maybe take another question on that would help that. But really, the main idea: every group doesn't have to be the best night ever. I'm not looking for that, but especially when we're starting off, if it, God forbid, if it does, it is just quick question, quick answer, and it's just one of those nights, then you need to be prepared to kind of have a plan B in your back pocket. Well, I think that there's more to this sermon and to these questions than, you're thinking this in your mind, right? That what's actually coming out in conversation is a quiet room. For whatever reason, people had a bad week, and so you kind of have a plan B in your back pocket of, I've got one more question, or I had a thought this week about why this is so hard, or I've had a question on, I've been at this church for a long time, and there's been years where we haven't done this well. Or one thing that I think would help us do better, and maybe this is something we do as a small group, is do a local mission project together. If we ever talked about that long term, would y'all be interested in that? Things like that, that you could add to help that. But like I said, you're not teaching. Don't feel like you have to come up with a thing. Really, the sermon is the setting. And again, this isn't, we want to love our pastor and talk about his sermons. No, this is so that the sermon goes beyond the pulpit. We want, so if we're going through Acts and we're talking about what the church is supposed to look like, then this is being rolled out in a real conversation with our small group. I mean, if we get to the end of Acts and the Lord, I feel, is leading us to, we say we're a community, we're really not a community. We've got work to do. We want to live real life on life together, real, honest and radical, loving each other and being honest with each other where we're at, and where our struggles are. Well, that's what these groups are for. You can walk out of a sermon and be like, that's a good sermon, we should probably do that. But it's different when you're in a small group and you're fleshing this stuff out and you're having conversations. That is when the wins start happening in my mind. And so that's kind of the goal. After that discussion, certainly a prayer time, and I'm not saying prayer time just to transition, but a prayer time, because what happens in prayer time, sometimes people do, after a period of time, start to say, hey, this hasn't been the best week. Our kids are struggling in school. Our son is really struggling right now, just with attitude. And it's kind of affecting us, and it's kind of affecting our marriage, and it's kind of affecting some other things. And just pray about that. Those are the kinds of things that are important in a group. But don't assume that happens off the bat. Maybe you're in a group with people that you've known already for years. You've been at the church for a while. That might happen quicker. But if you have some people that are new members, or you kind of have a group that doesn't know each other, don't expect the first 4, maybe 5 weeks, maybe even longer, for everyone to come in and be like, yeah, I just want to share my heart today. This is what's going on in my life. I just really believe in brutal honesty, gospel community on mission. Don't expect that right off the bat. If that happens, praise the Lord. But if that doesn't happen, that's not the end of the world either. These things take time. And so, anyway, so there is kind of a transition to prayer after that. And then there should be fellowship time at the end. It shouldn't be, just a drastic cutoff and then see you next week. There should be some fellowship time. Hey, there's still some brownies left over. There's still some, coffee left over, and let's, you're free to hang out and to have conversations. There's also another element to small groups that I think is important. I want us to see small groups as this is kind of like a small church within a church. It doesn't become a church, right? But it is like it's where your family is. We gather together to worship together, but your group, your Sunday school class or small group, we're really close together. And what my hope is that there's some things that happen out of our small groups. I would love for the day to happen when we talk about being on mission, everything is done out of your group. So if we're doing something in Huntsville, if we're doing something in Ecuador, we're doing something in Cleveland, Ohio, if we're doing something in Canada or Texas, wherever, we're talking about we're doing it together as a group. I would love it for on a regular occasion that, hey, by the way, just an announcement as we wrap up tonight. We are, Halloween's coming up, and we're going to get together with our kids at the Smith's house, and we are going to carve pumpkins. No Bible study, nothing like that. We're just getting together with our families, with our kids, and we're hanging out. Or it's June. And our pool's open, and we want you to invite your kids over, and as a group, we're going to hang out. Or it's Thanksgiving. We're gonna have a Friendsgiving kind of get together, or we're just going to watch the ball game. The ball game's on. We're gonna want to invite you over, or the Pattersons over there. They've invited us over their house next Saturday, or we're going to one of the high school football games together. But there's opportunities where throughout the year, on a regular occasion, you're just fellowshipping together outside of that time. You're becoming like a family within the church, and you're spending time together. So we want that to happen for sure. And for those things. The other thing I think this is probably the most important, and this is what I'm most excited about, is that within your group, I've said this before, I think it's very rare that a husband and a wife are going to sit down and the husband in front of his wife or the wife in front of his husband is going to go, hey, secretly, I've been wrestling with this for years, and I just hey, it's Sunday night, small group time. I just thought I would just bring this all out right here. That might happen, but real life, the chances of that happening aren't always great. And so what I've been a part of, and maybe you've been a part of this too, is that if you have, let's say you have 4 couples in a small group. Well, those guys, the husbands in that group, maybe once every other week on their lunch break at work, let's say a Thursday for lunch, they meet together at a close, barbecue joint or whatever, and they have lunch together and they talk about things that they don't want to bring up in small group. Or it's just, we're connecting and we're spending time together, but there's also kind of a check-in. Hey, how are y'all really doing? We know you wouldn't say this in Sunday morning church. We know you might not say this in your small group, but how is work really going? How is your fight for purity really going? Those types of things that you might not bring up in a small group and probably won't always happen in a small group. That's what I'm excited about. Real life on life honesty of who we are, and loving each other and helping each other, pushing each other closer to the Lord and closer to holiness. Women, same thing, that you would have that time. Maybe there's kids and there's babies, but everyone's going to come over to Devin's house for lunch and watch the kids, but also have just some check-in time. How are you doing? Every other week, the women doing their thing, the guys doing their thing, checking up on each other. So those are some important things that happen in that group. But as those groups meet together on that specific night, that's basically the flow. You have an intentional fellowship time at the beginning where people are coming in the door, but even as people are there, you're allowing that fellowship to happen. That's important. And that's not just, well, that's just kind of part of the beginning. No, that's an important part of it. Because sometimes in churches, we can get so crowded with, hey, we got to get in here, get this done, and get out the door, that you really don't connect. You can sit down with people all morning long on a Sunday morning at church and not connect because it's the service or it's a Sunday school or it's a meeting or whatever. You're not actually connecting. Just because you sit next to each other doesn't mean you're connecting. So that time at the front is important. And obviously the questions and the discussion, and it takes the right kind of facilitator to do that. That's why you don't have to be a teacher. You just kind of have to feel out and facilitate and steer a conversation. Most people that have been in the business world, just good at conversation, good at leading meetings, kind of can feel out how to steer conversations very well, even on the fly if need be. And so that's kind of people we're looking for, to open up your home and steer those conversations that honor the Lord, but also expound on what's coming out of the pulpit on Sunday morning. And then that kind of prayer, checking in with each other, and then kind of wrapping up. So that's kind of what happens in the meeting. Want to encourage you to, if you have any questions for me, please email me. There is going to be a time where we have maybe 1 or 2 in-person meetings, just to kind of make sure we're on the same page and who's kind of facilitators and that kind of thing, a little more information. Again, we're looking to launch in January. I know there's a lot of people excited that are interested in this. Next week, I want to send y'all just a video on maybe some questions that I think you should be asking. So the big question is always with these groups, what about childcare? That's a big issue, especially if you're not meeting in a home that's close to the church. You have to go to the church to drop off kids and then drive 15, 20 minutes back to your house. And then when you're done, you got to drive back to the church to pick up your kids and then back home. And so there is a solution to that. There's not a perfect solution, but there is a solution that I know most churches do. And so we'll talk about that next time, and then some more details, questions that you might have that I'll try to bring up. But any questions that you have, please email me. We're trying to get this thing a little more in focused. But mainly, I'm just excited about this. Continue to pray about your role in this. If you're going to be able to open up your home, what night would be good? Next time, I also want to talk about how often do you need to meet? How long do you need to meet? Do we need to take breaks during the summer? Do we need to split off and start a new group? All those things I'll address next time too. But pray about your group. Pray about the people that might be in it. And begin talking about what that time might look for you. So thank you for being interested in this. Continue to pray about your role.